All right, so chapter number 3 is all about listening. I don't think this is a very difficult chapter. I think actually it's a simple chapter for several reasons. First of all of you know about listening because all of you have been listening your entire life. I'm not telling you some revolutionary information. For the most part, you already intuitively understand what it means to listen. There may be a few aspects of listening that I need you to focus on and understand from the point of view of studying communication as a discipline. But I think for the most part, you guys are already familiar with this topic. So, what are our objectives for this lesson? Well, first of all, we're going to define what is listening and what are the stages of listening. And we'll talk a little bit about how you can increase your accuracy. We will talk about the major barriers in listening, and we'll also look at the 4 styles of listening and explain how these styles can be used. Okay? We'll very briefly look at the major cultural and gender differences when it comes to listening. But keep in mind that as I'm talking about cultural things, this is all built for the American culture. So you guys have to adapt and understand that, this may not be true for you personally, but this is true for your average Westerner in America, okay? Which is a great thing to learn. So let's talk about different stages of listening. We don't just listen, nothing in this world that we live in just happens like this and it's instantaneous, and it's not so easy. It's a process, okay? And listening is a process. So you've already read this in your textbook, but basically, if we're going to talk about listening, what is listening? Okay, what is this all about? It's a process, and it involves multiple stages or aspects of listening. So, first of all, when you listen, step number 1 is, do you actually hear? Because here's the deal. You're sitting over there, you got your AirPods in, right? And I'm talking and you can't hear me. Why? Because you're not hearing me. It's not you're not listening. You can't be listening if you're not even hearing me. The first thing that has to happen is the sound of my voice has to reach you, and it's not reaching you. So you can't listen if you don't hear. So that's obvious first step, okay? And of course, you may not be paying attention. I may be talking, but you're paying attention to something else. You're reading something on your computer, looking stuff up on your phone, browsing through your textbook, whatever it may be. I don't know. The point is that first aspect of listening is receiving the information. It's hearing, number 1, and then paying attention. If you don't hear and you don't pay attention, we can't go there, okay? As we move further, the second stage has to do with understanding, okay? This is where you heard what I said, but did you understand me? Because you could misunderstand me. You could say, he just used a bunch of words, I have no idea what they mean. Or I do hear him, and I kind of sort of understand it, but I'm not clear because I'm not exactly sure what he just said. Or maybe you didn't hear all of it, you only heard a part of it, okay? So this is where you say, I'm understanding the meaning of what I said. So a lot of times people speak to me and they'll say something and I say, I heard every word you said, but I have no idea what you mean by those words. And the truth is that I really don't know what they're trying to say. I don't know what they're trying to achieve by making a statement, okay? So, and sometimes, and I need to clarify. So like you came up to me before class, you asked me a question, and for a second, I wasn't sure what you were talking about until I said, did you start the test? And you said, yes, and you showed me a screen, and at that point, I understood exactly what happened, right? So I needed that clarification, but at first when you said to me, I did not understand. I needed to get past that stage of understanding the meaning of your words. Once you showed me, and once I understood the meaning of your words, okay, now we can work on this, now we can fix it, now we can do something about it. But I was stuck right there with you, okay? So the understanding the aspect is where I actually understand what you mean by what you're saying, okay? And then there's another aspect of this whole listening process, and that is memory or remembering. See, what happens is when you hear words, when you hear messages, you go back into your memory bank and you try to pull up information that is relevant and related to that topic or to that issue or to that question. You're not a blank slate. You're walking around with lots of information in your head. You know things about things. And so when I talk about something, that topic, you go into your memory and you say, what do I know about it? Okay? And that's again, a process of remembering. Once you remember, oh yeah, I know about this, okay? Then you go to evaluation. The next stage is evaluating, judging the content, critically thinking about what is being said. I heard you, I understood what you said, I do know something about it, but now I have to think of what you're saying. Is it really true? Is it really right? Are you being logical? Are you being coherent? Does your message make sense? Is your proposal good or bad? This is what you're just trying to say. You know, is this good? Is this right? Is this wrong? You start reasoning in your mind, thinking, you know, what am I going to do with this information? Am I going to classify this information as useful or not useful? And I'm going to judge this statement, this sentence, whatever is being given to me as something, you know, I can use or something that I really don't care about. You see what I mean? That you start evaluating the message. What can this message do for me? What do I need to do about this message? Is this message even true? Should I be concerned about it? Things like that. And you do that in your head without thinking. It's automatic. It's just happens. It's intuitive. Now, some people can be very purposeful about it. You can actually not engage in that, where you can just say, I don't care, and forget it all, right? Or you could say, wait a minute, this is important. I'm going to dwell on this for a little while. I'm going to consider this. This matters, okay? And then, of course, another aspect is your feedback. You're answering, you're giving feedback. What is feedback? When I say giving feedback in a conversation, we covered this in chapter 1. What is feedback? Come on, guys, I guarantee you that's going to be on the test. What is feedback? Give me your answer. Give me your thoughts on the topic. When I say feedback in a communication, what do I mean? Message, right? So I speak to you, and the feedback would be what?
Opinion or advice, suggestion.
Or even you answering me is feedback. How about you nodding your head when I say something is a feedback? How about you making eye contact with me as I'm speaking is a feedback, okay? You just going like this is a feedback. You paying attention, focusing on me is a feedback. Because what it tells me, I am being paid attention to. Or if you're not paying attention to me, it's a feedback. Because what it tells me is, that person tuned out. I don't have them anymore. They're gone. Okay? That's a feedback. Whether it's a positive feedback or a negative feedback, it doesn't really matter. The point is that there is a feedback in a conversation, in a communication. So when we talk about responding, it's not always responding by saying something. Sometimes you could, but sometimes just your action, your presence, your face, you know, or your attention is already a response. But some sort of a feedback essentially is what we're talking about as a process of listening. Because the truth is that as you give me feedback, I adjust my message. My message changes if you give me no feedback. I get frustrated because if I don't have feedback, I don't know if I'm getting through to you. I don't know if I should stop. I don't know if I should repeat. I don't know if I should, you know, say something else. Because my goal in communication is success. I don't care to communicate just to communicate. I want to communicate so that you understand what I'm saying. When I hear that connection, then I go on. If I don't hear that connection, I'm stuck. because I'm not getting what I want, right? So this is what happens in a listening conversation. Both people are participating. The listener participates just as much as the speaker, okay? Because this is what's going on in your head, and as you're processing this information, you're letting me know whether you were processing it or not processing it, where it makes sense, it doesn't make sense. Well, of course your thoughts stay in your head. I don't know that. But that's a part of the process of listening. Because if you're not thinking about what I'm saying, if you're not evaluating what I'm saying, okay, then you're not really considering my message seriously. You're dismissing my message at all, completely. So it's a part of this sort of say stages of effective listening. And that's different from just hearing, like I said. If you just heard somebody speak, but you really don't pay attention, then you're not listening. You're just hearing it. These are not the same things, okay? So, I see. When you are receiving information, that first step, right? What's important to understand about it, it's not about what is being also said, but it's also about what being omitted. We critically evaluate messages by what is not being said as well. Let's say I give you some information, right? But I leave some of it out. I tell you, all of you who take this test, will get an A. And you say, wait a minute, how is that going to work? All I have to do is take a test. Well, I'm omitting the fact that you actually have to score and answer the questions right to get an A, right? What I'm not saying is just as important, okay, than what I am saying. And by me not saying it, you think about it, wait a minute, that's not a full message. He didn't mean it that way. He didn't mean that I just get an A for taking a test. He meant more, but he didn't say it. Well, why didn't he not say it? So your mind just keeps going, and it does that in microseconds, actually. And so that's important when you hear a message. You're focusing. You also look at verbal and nonverbal messages, because I can be telling you something and I'm joking, right? So if you notice that I'm joking, if I give you a clue that I am saying something that I'm not being serious, okay, then while you hear me and what I'm actually saying is one thing, but what I mean is something completely different, because I'm not being serious. Okay? I could make a joke, right? But you have to understand that it's a joke, right? The only way you're going to understand it is by paying attention and by focusing. Because if you're not looking at my nonverbal language, you may not think. If you're just hearing me but not seeing me, you may think I'm serious. But seeing me, seeing the smile, okay, on my face, you realize that, oh yeah, he's not being serious. That's a joke. See how your process of receiving a message is actually quite complicated. So obviously you have to pay attention and zero in and focus. So another important feature that, kind of key for this stage of listening, the authors say, avoid assuming you understand something before the speaker finished speaking. Have you ever done that? Tell me. Somebody is saying something, and before they even finish saying something, you're like, oh yeah, sure, I know that. Okay, bye. Done with that. You figured out that you know what they're going to say before they even finish their sentence. The truth is you don't know. You have no way of knowing. You could predict, you can maybe imagine, maybe you have a good sense, to know what that person is going to say. But you don't truly know. You kind of hope you know. So and this is a flaw that a lot of times happens, is like if the communication is really important, don't just dismiss it before you even heard it. Because you might hear it something completely different and it would change everything. So in the understanding stage, it's all about making sense of meaning. So when I say something, I encode meaning into it. And you have to decode what my meaning is. By this word, he means that. It happens within microseconds in your brain. If you actually understand my speech, then your mind goes through possible options and chooses the right meaning for the right word, okay? but that's also a little bit of a subjective process. So grasping the thoughts and all the accompanying emotional tone is very important, because you're not just hearing what I'm saying, you're also watching me, right? This is a live communication. So you see my emotions, you see my feelings. If I'm upset, you can tell. If I'm uncomfortable, you can tell. If I'm nervous, you can tell, right? You should be able to notice this in my appearance. So, so the more effective you are in these stages of listening, the more likely you will actually understand the meaning. So when we listen, this is the stage of understanding, is where we have to say, we have to relate the information that we hear to what we already know. Because what if I'm telling you something and it's untrue? Well, what you do know about those things that I'm talking about, whatever my topic can be, could be medicine, right? What I'm telling you is not true. And you say, wait a minute, I know this. Let's say we talk about coronavirus right now, right? And I tell you some information about coronavirus, and you're going to say, wait a minute, I know it is transmitted through air. And I can tell you, oh, no, it's only transmitted through handshake, as long as you, had no physical contact. And you're just like, wait a minute, no, I know it's transmitted through air. So I just told you something incorrect, but because you know something about this topic, you were able to see that I was inaccurate, I was incorrect in my assumptions, and you could say, no, I'm not buying this. This guy doesn't really know what he's talking about. He really doesn't understand how this virus works. So things like that. It also, a very powerful point is if you could see the speaker's messages from their point of view. A lot of times we are focused on ourselves, we think how we understand the world, but if you take the time to hear whoever is speaking and say, oh, what they're saying, I get it, because if I was them, this is how I would see the world as well. So stepping into the shoes of the speaker helps you to understand their message as well. So there's these great techniques, sort of say, that the textbook gives you that helps you to become more effective as you listen to people. And the other one is very valuable, is paraphrasing or rephrasing what the speaker said. So if I'm talking to you and I said something, and you want to be sure that you understand me, what you say to me is that, so what you're saying is, and then you repeat what you think I said in your own words. And then I say, no, that's not what I meant. See what just happened? You were just an inch away from misunderstanding me, but because you said, oh, so what you mean is this, oh, so what you're saying is that, and all of a sudden you just caught that, and I said, no, that's not what I meant, you misunderstood me. And then I get a chance to say it again, right? And the second time you understood me. And then we have a clear and good communication. But it wouldn't happen if you didn't repeat to me what you think you heard me say. Because a lot of times our perception is where things break down. We don't hear the same thing. I'm saying one thing, you're hearing another thing. Okay? So that's a very common problem. So how do you fix it? You paraphrase whatever the person said to you back to them, and they can confirm or deny whether what you said is, that or something else. So the next stage, you're remembering, this is where you have to think about this topic and say, what do I know about it? This is where you're digging into your database on that issue, whatever that discussion may be. Now, to be more effective in this particular stage is you have to focus on the central ideas. I'm talking about something, and I just mentioned Nikes, right? And you just went off on Nikes. But what I'm talking about is not Nikes, but prices. Okay? So my conversation is about value and money, not brand. And you just went off, and what you did is you lost focus. My central idea is not that brand. My central idea is cost, value, okay? Worth. But you lost it because you thought I was really talking about the brand. So what happened is you misunderstood what my main central idea was. And you lost the connection with me. you do have to organize what you hear, because a lot of times I might make a speech and I might throw a lot of things at you, and you have to kind of group those things into sections or into cohesive systems so you can understand what I'm saying. Okay, and then you have to take the new information that you receive from me and relate it to the old information you have. If you already know about something about the topic that I'm speaking about, then whatever new information I give you, you're going to say, wait a minute, that's new. But then you relate it to what you already know, and you connect it, and that way your knowledge grows. Okay? And then as I'm speaking, I may be talking about different words or concepts or ideas. I may be introducing terminology. If you want to learn that terminology, if you want to remember something new that you're learning, you have to repeat it to yourself, even if it's in your head. Now, it's great if you're taking notes, you jot it down, you write it down, it's even better. But even if you say it to yourself, let's say I'm talking about plants and I'm teaching you a biology class and I mention photosynthesis, and you say, wait a minute, photosynthesis, I got a record, I got to remember that. So you jot it down, or you say photosynthesis, 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 and all of a sudden that term now is in your head. Why? Because you repeated it several times. This is an effective strategy for remembering, for listening, and you're going to relate that process to the topic of plants and growing things and things like that. So next time I speak about it, you're going to say, oh, I know exactly what he means, because I remember him talking about it last week. So the next stage of evaluation is really all about judging what you hear. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it right? Is it wrong? Is it valuable? Is it not valuable? Like, you basically make a call on the quality of information you're receiving. Okay? And so to be more effective in your judgment of, basically sorting out what I said, you have to, number one, resist to kind of make a judgment until you heard enough. You have to hear enough. Don't make a decision on what is being said in the first few seconds or minutes of what is being said. Hear out the fuller message, because the good stuff may come later. Okay? The real important part may come a little bit later. And then you have to assume that the speaker has goodwill. That is something we do in the West. In the Western tradition, if a speaker gets up and speaks, the presumption is that what they have to say is something good, not something bad. That they may not have a good message. They may be talking about something very negative and unpleasant. But the reason they're talking about it is because they're seeking the good of other people. They're not sharing this information to hurt somebody. They're sharing this information to make this world better, to somehow help people. They're not just talking about a topic to make everyone depressed. Maybe they need to make everyone aware of what's going on. Maybe they need to caution people. Maybe they need to warn them. And it may not be a great message, and it may not be comfortable to you to hear about, but you need it. And so I'm doing you a favor. I'm doing something good by talking about a topic like that. So the presumption in the Western tradition is that whenever a speaker gets up and speaks, that their purposes are honorable and good, versus how I'm going to trick all of you now. I'm going to make you all believe a bunch of lies. The presumption is that that's not why you get up to speak. Okay, and you have to give people the benefit of the doubt. You have to trust that that they're getting up to do a right thing. Okay, so but you do have to distinguish facts from opinions and your personal interpretations. Okay. Do you guys know a little bit about how distinguishing facts from opinions? How would you distinguish a fact from an opinion? Would you be able to establish that something is a fact or an opinion? Okay? iPad is the best personal device there is. Fact or an opinion? Thank you, opinion. Why? Because it's based on my preference, right? That's what I'm using. Somebody else might have a different view, and they'll say, no, there's a better one, okay? It's not a fact. If I want it to be a fact, then I'd have to bring research and data and prove it to you, right? So that's the thing. But if I say, the cover of my iPad is black, that's a fact. How is it a fact? You just verified it by looking at it, right? It's verifiable. Facts are verifiable. Sometimes not easily verifiable, sometimes it's hard to verify a fact, but they are verifiable. Opinions, not verifiable. Okay, they're subjective. So thank you. That was a good answer. I appreciate that. All right, and then so the next aspect of this wheel of communication and listening is responding. So responses can be nonverbal. They can be you actually saying something, or it can be you just basically showing to me that you're listening. Response can follow what is being said afterwards, the speech, or response can be instantaneous as the person is speaking. But the response is a part of the listening experience. If you're not somehow responding in some way, shape, or form to this process of listening, that you're not fully listening is what I'm trying to say. It could be a very mellow response. It could be a very toned down response. Barely noticeable response, but it still is a response. I may not notice the response, but you still have it, a response. And so, of course, it's great if I notice your response. That's the idea. But that's that circle that we go through as we move through the stages of listening. Now, let's see, several suggestions that they're offering us in the textbook to improve our responses is to express support of the speaker. That's good. Use a variety of back-channeling clues. So you guys know a little bit about that. So there are things that there are cues that we give to people, or back channels, right? We talked about that in chapter 1, that we're listening, right? That we're paying attention, that we're with them. And then another one is taking ownership of the responses by using I messages. That's something a little extra material over there, but that's also in the textbook. I'm not going to go into that right now. Avoiding common problem-causing listening responses, such as appearing preoccupied. So this is good. If you're listening to somebody and the whole time you're doing texting on your cell phone or you're swiping or something like that, what it tells to the speaker is you're not really paying attention. You're multitasking. Yeah, you're hearing what they're saying, but you may be completely disengaged because you're more interested in whatever it is going on your screen or something like that. So things like that. So paying attention, eye contact, things like that are ways of supporting the speaker. And that is how you improve that stage of receiving. Okay? All right. So that was the first part of the first objective that we looked about is our stages of listening. All right. So that's pages like 55 and on. It's not as simple as you could see. 59. Yeah, there you go. 55 through 59. It's not as simple. The second part is the barriers. What are our listening barriers? How can we do have barriers in listening, because if we didn't have barriers, we would understand everything perfectly 100% of the time, but we don't. And sometimes the barriers are our fault, sometimes the barriers are not our fault. There's nothing we can do about it. It just happens, okay? So how do we get better about overcoming some of these barriers? What are these barriers? That's what I'd like to talk a little bit about with you. Just reviewing the chapter here. So in the communication, in the conversation, in an event when you're communicating with a person, it's both the speaker and the listener that are responsible for listening. I have to listen to you as much as you have to listen to me. Now, you may not be talking the whole time, but I have to pay attention to how you're receiving my message, okay? And the common barriers to listening are physical and mental distractions. Now, sometimes we're too far apart. If you're sitting back in a class and I do not speak loud enough, you may not hear what I have to say, right? So that's a physical barrier. Maybe you're distracted because you're thinking about, oh, I got up this morning and my neck really hurts. I slept funny and my neck really hurts. And the whole time you're sitting, you're in pain. So you're just stretching your neck, moving around, and you're in pain. And I'm talking about something, like, all you can think about is my neck hurts. What happened? You're mentally distracted. It has nothing to do with me. I didn't do anything. In fact, my speech is perfect, okay? But you're distracted because there's something wrong in your life going on. It has nothing to do with me. but you can't help it. You're thinking about the pain in your neck because it's hurting you. It could be anything. It could be you had a bad day. It could be you're tired. You didn't sleep enough. It could be anything. It doesn't really matter. The point is that there are physical distractions, there are mental distractions. Maybe you're preoccupied, something happened in your life emotionally, okay? Your best friend just, treated you bad, and you're thinking about it, and you can't stop thinking about it. It's on your mind. So whatever I say is being distracted by what's on your mind, and you're really thinking about your relationship with your friend, okay? We have biases and prejudices. There is a problem. This is a huge problem in our world we live in. All of us are biased. All of us have prejudices of one sort or another. We all judge the world unfairly. We just do. We're human beings. We don't know everything. We don't know all truth. And sometimes we believe things that are not true. Okay? And based on those beliefs that are not true, we judge the world around us. We have limited information, and we make calls and we make judgments. And sometimes those calls and judgments are inaccurate. Sometimes they're based on prejudices. Okay? I may believe that, something strongly about an issue or topic, and that stops me from receiving any more education in that area. Like, for example, you may believe that you're an excellent communicator, that you are a champion in giving speeches. Therefore, me teaching you how to communicate, you have a prejudice. You're like, I don't need this. I already know this. I'm smarter than this guy anyway. You may think that my intelligence is inferior, and that's a prejudicial judgment based on you because you don't really know me, but you think I'm stupid, so you're not going to listen to me. So now you're going to miss out on the good information that I have to give you, but the only reason you're missing out is because you think that I am not smart enough to teach you. That's a prejudice, okay? That's a bias. You may think too highly of yourself, or you may think too low of me. And therefore, our communication now cannot happen. If you didn't possess those beliefs, if you didn't possess those attitudes, then our communication would be different. You would have accepted me and heard what I have to say, but only because of who I am or who you think I am, you reject what I have to say. So that's called a prejudice, okay? There's some people that will never hear what the other person have to say because they have a prejudice against that person, or against that kind of a person, or against the culture of that person, or against the language of that person. Do you know, most people in America, when they meet somebody from overseas and they hear an accent, they immediately show their prejudices. They can't help it. If you do not speak perfect English and you try to speak to someone, a lot of times they will raise their voice and they will speak louder to you once they hear your accent. You ever experienced that? Or they will slow down and speak slower, which is not always bad, okay? Because they realize, hey, that person is not a native English speaker, I'm going to slow down. But slowing down is good, but speaking louder is a problem. You know why? I'm not deaf. I may not speak this language perfectly, but I can still hear you just fine. And that's what I mean. That's like a prejudice. Like immediately, it's something that people do. It's psychological. They slow down, and a lot of times they raise their volume. And okay, that's not helpful necessarily, because I still get you. Or they start moving their hands a lot more and things like that. So they start speaking differently, like they speak to a baby or something like that. Bring the communication down to a level of a child or something like that. And that's demeaning, okay? So just because a person speaks with an accent doesn't mean that they don't understand. See? Being able to express yourself eloquently and beautifully in English is not the same as not understanding beautiful and eloquent English. You may have 100% understanding, but having a hard time expressing it in the same way, because the skill is not there. You're not practiced, okay? So we have biases, we have prejudices, we lack focus And of course, we have premature judgment. So this is some of our big problem barriers. We judge too fast. We don't pay attention enough. So distractions. There's physical and mental distractions. I've already mentioned that. You can have hearing impairment. You can't hear me. We're sitting in a noisy environment, something going on, loud music. You can't hear me, okay? Mental barriers. You're thinking about something that's going on in your life, in your mind, and or you're too emotional to think because something happened terrible. The biases and prejudices, common ones can be race, age or gender. Some people dismiss somebody just because they're old or just because they're young. A young person can be dismissed because they don't know what they're talking about because they're too young. The old person can be dismissed because what do they know? They're talking about stuff because they're too old to talk about these things because they don't really know, things like that. So all sorts of biases and prejudices. The focus, you can lose focus for various reasons. You can be influenced by just because you're not catching the main idea of what is being said, because you're not interested in the topic, let's put it that way. You can lose focus, you can lose sight of it. That's one of the most common ways we lose focus, is that we get distracted by something we hear the speaker say, and that sends us off to the side. Our thoughts gone. We're not focusing on speech anymore, we're thinking about something he said. But he keeps going on, but we're already gone. We're somewhere else. And the other one is that we're not identifying the central idea. The speech is about this, but I focus on that because I heard that word, and that word means something special to me. And that's it. So we go off. And then the premature judgment is basically is the common courtesy that we should give people a chance to say what they have to say before we draw a conclusion. That's something that in our modern culture, people are very impatient. They just want to go on, and move faster than it's possible. Okay? So those are our common barriers. Any questions about the barriers? Does it make sense? This should make common sense. This is not something unknown to you guys. It's just, maybe you have not thought about it in this way, in an organized way, but this is definitely something you know. Questions? No? You good? You tracking with me? Okay. So let's talk about the listening styles. All right, so we covered pages like 60, let's see, we covered page 60. Listening styles begins on page 61. All right, so when you listen, you have to understand why you listen. Okay? Depending on where you find yourself, depending on what's going on in the room, you have to say, why am I listening to this? Or how am I listening to this? And so the author introduces these 4 listening styles. Polite, you have emphatic, polite, critical, and active. So in emphatic listening, you basically confirm to the speaker what they're saying. You understand their point of view. You say, I hear you, I understand you, yes, so true, whatever. You tell them some way of saying, I know what you're saying is true on some level. And you say, I get it, yes, I'm with you, you're right. It involves you stepping into their world, into their shoes, and seeing the situation from their point of view. Like a person who had some kind of a terrible thing happen. Let's say you got into a car accident. They're having the worst day of their life because the car they have that they love, they crashed, it's all in pieces, they're hurt, and all you have to do is say, you don't have to sit there and say, oh, don't worry, you get a new car. Oh, that car wasn't so great anyway. You can just sit there and say, you know what, I'm really sorry this happened. I know you're hurting. I know that this was a big thing and you probably freaked out. I get it. So all you want to do is give a person affirmation rather than say, you know what, that car wasn't so great. Look at you, at least your arms and legs are still together. They're not torn off laying on the side of the road. Like, you can be very insensitive and talk to people like that, but that's not going to get you places. So this is emphatic listening, where you basically try to feel what other people are feeling and speak to them on a level of understanding what they feel. It's not about what they said. It's about you making a connection with another human being and saying, I feel what you feel. You feel sad, I feel sad. I understand why you're sad. So that's one listening style that we often employ. The other one is polite listening, where you basically are being nice and polite by simply paying attention to what the person says, not interrupting them. You kind of nod and say, yeah, I hear what you're saying. You don't have to agree, but nodding just means I heard you, okay? I'm paying attention, I'm there, I'm with you. You may show empathy to the speaker by your nonverbal clues of making eye contact and things like that. And you may just, give some sort of a positive feedback. And that's what we call polite listening. You're listening because it's the right thing to do. Not that you care, you may not need this, but you're just being polite. And you're saying, okay, I'm gonna hear you out. So we all do this. All of us do this type of listening as well. And so, but that's not the same thing as emphatic, okay? So it's a different mode of listening. Now, the other type of listening that is probably the most crucial for you to learn if you don't already know how to do it well is for school, right here, where you are right now in this point of life. It's called critical listening. It is the most important type of listening that you have to be engaging in, okay? You have to be, in critical listening, you have to be logical and dispassionate, okay? That means you have to reason about what is being said. Consider it carefully, because what is being said is important, perhaps, because in learning, of course, you have to learn, you have to get, you have to understand. So you have to logically reason out what is being said. The information you're being given is important, okay? And then you have to be dispassionate, meaning you don't need to have feelings about it. You put your feelings aside. Maybe you're learning something you don't really care much about. You have to say, it doesn't matter that I don't care much about it, I have to learn it. So I'm going to put my personal feelings aside, and I'm just going to listen to what is being said. Why? Because the message itself is important, not the topic. The topic I don't care about. But you put that in brackets. You become a scientist. You just say, this is just an object, and I am in a process of investigation, okay? It's like a person who's investigating a crime. He can't just say, oh, I know he did it. No, he has to let the evidence speak for the crime, right? So that's the idea. So that, having said that, when you're listening critically, you have to keep an open mind, because you have to hear all the details. Remember, if you're prejudicial, if you've already decided, you don't need this, you don't want this, you don't care about this, you don't like it, you've already decided not to listen. You're not going to have an open mind. You're not going to learn anything from somebody that you already decided has nothing to teach you at all. Alrighty, that's it, you're done. You have to avoid filtering. This is something that we do as human beings. We kind of filter out the information we're interested in and from the information we're not interested in. Well, critical listening, all of it is important. And yeah, you have to make judgments, but you have to avoid this technique of filtering. Recognize your own biases. This is very important. For critical listening, you have to say, I know I hate French fries. So if this guy gives me a speech about how French fries are bad for you, I'm already biased to believe everything he says because I hate French fries. You see what I mean? And you have to admit to yourself, I know that I agree with this guy before I even heard what he said. Because when he gets up and makes a speech about how French fries are terrible and awful and bad for you, I'm not going to be judging his speech based on what he says. I am already agreeing with him, so I'm biased, so I already think it's a great speech before I even heard it. See, that's the problem. The speech could be awful. It could be nonsense. It could be gibberish. But you've already decided, I already like this, I agree with this, so of course anything this guy's going to say is going to be great. You see, you recognize your own bias, and you say, whatever my personal feelings are, I'm going to put them aside and pretend I don't have them. So I can hear this information just like the person that doesn't have those feelings would hear it. See what I mean? That's what we call critical listening. Otherwise, you will never hear the other side. You will never hear something you don't believe or you don't agree with. You'll never be able to hear it because you've already turned your mind off. You said, I'm done, I've decided. My mind is made up. That's a problem. That means you can never change your mind. That means you can never correct an error in your own thinking. So you have to recognize your own biases. You have to check them. You have to bracket them. You have to combat the tendency to sharpen things. Sometimes what we do is we hear what we want to hear. Okay, sharpening is a technique. If I say, we're going to have to, before the end of the day, we're going to have a quiz, or something like that. What do you think I said, is the question. I said, before the end of the day, we're going to have a quiz. You could say, you can sharpen on the fact quiz, we're going to have a quiz, so that you sharpen quiz as an issue, okay? You could sharpen before the end of the day as the time, or I say, we're going to have. You can focus on different parts of my sentence, and you can emphasize them to yourself as my message, which could be not my message at all. Because what I'm trying to say is sometimes you can focus on just parts of my message and make them stand out more than the other parts. That's what we call sharpening, okay? You're making that an issue where in reality it is not. That is not what I am saying. That is not what I am emphasizing, which is why a good speaker a lot of times will enunciate things and stress certain words in their speech, okay? If I say, yes, yesterday Mary took John out for lunch at the Italian restaurant, that just gives you information, right? Yesterday Mary took out John for lunch at the Italian restaurant. I could say, yesterday Mary took out John for lunch at the Italian restaurant. What did I just emphasize? Time. If I say, yesterday Mary took out John for lunch at the, what I'm emphasizing now? I'm emphasizing who she took for lunch, right? I could say, yesterday Mary took out John to an Italian restaurant. Not what I'm emphasizing. It's not when, it's not who, it's what they ate, right? The cuisine. So you see the emphasis changes. What we do is sometimes we sharpen and focus on a wrong emphasis. We make a wrong emphasis on the sentences, and that makes us misunderstand, okay? In critical listening, we can't miss that. We can't miss that. So we have to fight our tendencies to sharpen certain things and to focus on things that we should not focus on. And then we have to focus on both verbal and nonverbal messaging, because whatever I'm saying, if I'm making that same speech and I say, yesterday, Mary took out John, for lunch at an Italian restaurant. My gesture, like this, pointing to time aspect in the past, yesterday, you understand that what I'm really stressing is the time aspect, right? So how I'm gesturing, what I'm gesticulating, using my hands or face or whatever, my body, it all sends a message. And you as a receiver need to catch that clue and understand what I'm trying to stress, okay? Versus what your mind wants to stress. Because your mind is your mind, but you remember, you got to understand what I'm saying. And not in your own way, but in my way, if you really want to understand me. If you want it to be my speech and not your speech. You see what I mean? That's the thing. So critical listening, there's a lot of things to be mindful of. All right, so we had emphatic, we had polite, we had critical. Now active listening. Active listening is another aspect that I really want you to be aware of. This is something that we all employ to a degree, but some of us are better at it and others are not as good. Okay? This is when we listen and respond. Okay, this is when we respond to the speaker by speaking with them about what they said. All right? You check your understanding, what we talked about earlier. A person asks you something and you think you misunderstand them, so you repeat what they're talking about and confirm that you really did understand. Because if you repeat it to them and you were correct, then they'll say, yeah, yeah, that's what I mean. If you weren't correct, then they'll say, no, no, that's not what I meant. And that way, active listening increases the accuracy of comprehension, okay? And you also, in active listening, we also acknowledge how a person feels. That's another aspect. It's a little bit related kind of like to emphatic listening. But that is being taken part, because you can be a passive listener and basically understand the feelings of the person, but not confirm it to them that you understand. If I don't know that you understand how I feel, that doesn't make me feel better. You know, it makes me wonder. I'm wondering if anybody understands, you know, and that's a problem for me relating to you on a personal level. I have a hard time. You know, we're talking about being effective, okay? And so when you acknowledge that, hey, I understand how you feel, that's a response that a speaker is waiting for. Because if they're expressing their feelings, then they most likely want those feelings to be recognized, okay? And if they're not recognized, that's going to make them feel even worse if they're feeling bad, okay? Or if they're excited and you don't share my excitement, then I don't feel like you're with me. You know, that's the idea. So also stimulate the speaker to explore thoughts and feelings. This is where an active listener would say, if you're having a conversation with a person and they tell you something, you would ask them about how they feel about something, or what if kind of questions, or how does that work, or what do you think about that? It's, again, taking the information that the person has said and using that information to further a conversation in a direction, okay? So a lot of times I ask you guys questions in class, not because I really need to hear an answer, but because I want to stimulate thinking in your mind in a particular direction. And I want to see if you're able to think in that direction. And I want to hear what you're thinking in that direction, because that will allow me to judge whether I'm being effective in this particular area, or I need to spend more time on this particular topic. So when I ask you a question, I ask you a question because I want to have an opportunity to know what's going on in your mind. So this is what I'm actually doing, is I'm stimulating our conversation by asking a thoughtful question about the content of our discussion, of our conversation, of our communication. And so that's a technique of active listening, because as a speaker, I must listen as well. Okay, I cannot be passive. So some of the techniques also that include that we were talked about: paraphrasing the speakers, what they're saying, what the meaning of their words, expressing and understanding, and then asking questions. I can tell if a person is listening to me by the type of questions they ask. If they ask a question that I've actually already answered in a speech, that tells me you're not listening. Or if they ask me a question that is unrelated to what I am speaking about, that tells me that they missed my central idea. They don't understand what my speech is about, or what am I trying to say by my speech. You see what I mean? So asking questions is another aspect of listening. All right. So those are the types of listening that we usually engage in. Do you guys recognize those types of listening within yourself, by the way? Do you recognize those things? You do those things, you know that. To the degree to which you do it may vary. Some of you are maybe very good active listeners, and others are not so much. Some of you are maybe very good critical listeners, others may not be so much. And so the goal is to, wherever you find yourself, is use these techniques to get better. By being mindful, by understanding, hey, I didn't realize that this is a part of my, this is how I do things, but I really should be doing things that way. Again, that's what this book is about, is improving your skills. All right, so let's talk a little bit about cultural differences and how we listen from culture to culture. You guys are familiar with the fact that different cultures have different ethics when it comes to listening or responses. It is really, intercultural communication is unique, let's put it that way, because cultures are unique. And none of us have just one culture or two cultures. We're usually a part of multiple cultures, right? you yourself are a member of multiple cultures simultaneously. Okay? Because where you're from, you're part of the culture of the country you come from. But because of the family that you grew up with, let's say if you're raised in a Christian household where people believe in God and things like that, maybe many of the people that surround you, even in the neighborhood where you live, don't believe the same way you believe. So you yourself already have a different culture within you. Different from the guy who lives next door to you, even though he lives next door to you. You shop in the same store. You go to the same school. But he doesn't believe the way you believe, therefore you already have a different culture. Because you're young and he's old, you have a different culture. Because he lived through some war and you didn't, you have a different culture. Because he lived through a terrible famine and disease and you didn't, you have a different culture. You don't experience life in the same way. And so people they're members of different cultures. If you're a member of a particular generation, you're going to have certain things that are part of your culture. The recent generation does not know what it's like not to have mobile technology or cell phones or things like that. Somebody who's 90 years old can live without it just fine. Even if they've never seen one in their life, they'd be just as happy as they can be. I take away your phone, you'd be like, what do I do now? How do I live my life? I don't know. You're stuck. Why? Because you don't rely upon it so much. Because it's so much a part of your life. So these are cultures. So when we communicate, that all affects the way we speak to each other. There are cultural differences, what I'm trying to say, is understanding those differences make our communication better. Ignoring those differences makes our communication worse. Because we basically are not recognizing that the person we're talking to, or the person who's speaking to us, is not like us. We are assuming they're just like me. And that's the wrong assumption, okay? You have to assume they're not like me. And then you have to ask your question, what are they like? And maybe that explains why they said what they said, okay? So there's 3 cultural influences of listening: a language and speech, nonverbal behaviors, and then feedback. Those are biggest differences across cultures. Language and speech is obvious. We do not speak the same languages. We do not communicate in the same way. In some cultures, people speak a lot. In other cultures, people speak little. In some cultures, people are very emotional and open about, communicating things. In others, they're more reserved. So nonverbal behaviors are a big part. Because remember, it's never just language. It's language that is always accompanied by your behavior, how you behave nonverbally. Okay? So there are aspects, of Asian culture, for example, where people do not express themselves verbally a lot of times. They express themselves non-verbally, right? And that's acceptable and it's normal. So sometimes Westerners, well, most of the time Westerners, well, let's say it this way, Westerners always struggle with the aspect of Asian culture, of Asians not speaking enough, in their opinion. Now, to an Asian, they speak enough. They're perfectly fine, because from their perspective, that's just fine. But a Westerner says, that's not enough. I need more. Give me more. Because I don't hear enough. I don't understand. I need more. I can't read everything about you. I can't read your mind, so tell me how it is. See, that's the major difference between Easterners and Westerners that exists out there. And sometimes there are people in the middle. But you will see this. You'll see this frustration. You'll even see this with me. I have limited time. And when I ask you a question, I need an answer. If you don't give me an answer, I'm like, okay, I don't know where to go next because I can't read your mind. I need you to speak it up. So the method of our instruction requires, feedback, sort of say. If I don't see that you're understanding, then I have to change my instruction. I have to change my method. I have to adapt. So these are the things that are interdependent. And you'll see this, that from culture to culture, we run into these problems, okay? The book uses an examples of people looking at somebody, okay? So in a Western culture, if you don't look somebody in the face, if you don't make eye contact when you're speaking to them, it communicates dishonesty, okay? That means you're lying, basically. That's how people understand you in the West. Seriously. People run into trouble all the time. Like, you're guilty, you don't look people in the eye. See, but in many other cultures, you don't look people in the eye as a sign of respect, right? Respect, honor. Like you're speaking to an elder, You don't look them in the eye because it's like challenging. You're like, I'm just like you, we're on the same level, And so culturally speaking, in the East, that's not. You look down, right? You don't make direct eye contact. You make eye contact, but just for a second, right? To let people know that you're paying attention, but then you're looking down. You're not looking directly because that's challenging you, okay? In the West, that's not the case. In the West, you don't look me in the eye, you are challenging me. You're telling me, I don't care. I'm not paying attention. I'm not listening. Or I have something to hide and I don't want you to see that in my eyes, so I'm hiding my eyes because I don't want you to see that. If you don't look people in the eyes in the West, they will feel unhappy. See, it's completely the opposite, right? In other cultures. So these are the things that create barriers. It could be the behavior, it could be the language, it could be the lack of responsiveness to a person or feedback or how you respond. So there's also gender differences. The way men and women speak is very different. Again, I'm speaking culturally, and I'm speaking about Western culture here. Maybe these things do express differently in different parts of the world, but according to the research of how people communicate from gender to gender, men and women are different. For example, women tend to communicate to build relationships and to affirm their connection to a person. Men tend to speak to assert authority, to create an effect that they're an expert. I really know what I'm talking about. Okay? How men listen is different. Men listen less, talk more. Again, I'm talking about Western culture. All right? Women listen more, sometimes talk less. Not always, again, there's always exceptions, but these are the things. So why men and women listen and how they listen is different, because they're trying to achieve different goals. And part of it is about our culture and society. But even within genders, there are tendencies that people follow. And so when you realize, certain people are speaking, they're speaking the way they're speaking, well, they're being who they are. When you don't recognize those differences is when you run into trouble, okay? So you simply have to be aware. Who am I speaking to? Why are they acting the way they are? And a lot of times the answer is, they're being themselves, they're a product of their culture. I need to try to understand them by stepping into their shoes, by understanding what their culture is like, what are the things important to them, and things like that. So why is listening so important? Because listening is crucial to success. If you don't listen to people around you, you may miss out a lot of information and may not have meaningful relationships with people. You can't build relationships. Listening serves a variety of purposes. Here in class, obviously, it's comprehension, it's information, it's building a knowledge or skill. I'm giving you examples that try to break through the theory of listening that we're talking about here. So, and it is a multi-step process, as we have already talked about, and everyone, both have to be engaged, the listener and the speaker. There are many obstacles to listening, but we can overcome them if we know what they are and we focus. If you're saying, wait, I'm being distracted, wait, I can't focus on the speech because of such and such and such thing. The moment you recognize a problem, you're already taking a first step to overcome it. The problem is that when you don't recognize a problem, because then you can't fix it. You can't fix something that you don't even know that's broken. But when you realize, wait a minute, I'm really distracted this morning because I'm feeling pain. Then you start saying, wait a minute, I need to focus, I need to focus. So you tell yourself, come back, don't dwell on the pain. So things like that. And so in effective listening, if you're going to be good at listening, you're going to have to make adjustments as you go along, and you're going to have to make these mindful course corrections, so to say. And that's the main idea. All right, so that pretty much is our chapter here, ladies and gentlemen. That covers it all.